So at long last, Blighty is emerging from lockdown, pubs are reopening, and we're actually seeing friends in real life rather than crappy pixelated versions of them in Microsoft toss-in Teams. So now is a great time to bag yourself a 5G ready smartphone in anticipation of all of those crowded events and those packed high streets where everyone is battling each other for a bit of mobile network action. Rubbing shoulder to shoulder with fellow human beings close enough to smell what they had for breakfast. After several months inside, it makes me feel a bit queasy actually. Well, the good news is you can choose between a selection of budget-friendly 5G smartphones in 2021 from the likes of Motorola, Xiaomi, Realme and Oppo, some of which come in at under 200 quid, and many of them boasting great gaming chops, impressive battery life, and even slick 120Hz displays. Now, I've personally tested and published a video on all of the phones mentioned in this roundup, so you can go check those out for more on each individual handset. But now here's my roundup of the best budget-friendly 5G smartphones in 2021. And for more on the latest greatest tech, please do poke subscribe and ding that notifications bell. Cheers! So first up is one of the most impressive value handsets launched in 2020, the clunkily named but rather lovely Xiaomi Mi 10T Lite. Seriously, the specs of this absolute unit are just as eye-catching as this rose gold paint job. For just over 200 quid here in Blighty, you get a mighty 6.67 inch display with 120Hz refresh. You got a good bit of dependable 64 megapixel primary camera action, and of course you got that 5G support courtesy of the Snapdragon 750G chipset that is stuffed inside. That slick and smooth IPS screen is great for gaming, as well as seeing bollocks to work with an all-day anime marathon. Meanwhile, the 750G power means you can blaze through titles like PUBG and Call of Duty with the graphics set to ultra beefy and keep a gorgeous fluid frame rate. The 4800 mAh battery will give you 2 days of use if you don't go nuts, full intensive day no worries, and in fact the only weak link here is the quad camera led by that 64 megapixel primary sensor, which does sometimes struggle if conditions aren't perfect. But it is just a case of learning the Mi 10T Lite's limitations, accepting them, and you'll get good looking photos more often than not. But of course a major contributing factor to how well you get on with the Mi 10T Lite basically surrounds your opinions on Xiaomi's MiUI launcher. MiUI 12 adds some funky features like that control center, which is shamelessly lifted from Apple, and dedicated gaming tools, but it can be a little bit quirky at times. And Xiaomi also recently released the Redmi Note 10 5G, although frankly stick it side by side alongside that Mi 10T Lite and it isn't quite as trouser-rousing. For one, the Redmi Note 10 5G isn't as eye-poppingly attractive as the Mi 10T Lite, plus the rest of the specs are generally a step backwards, while the camera is a serious letdown. Besides that, it is the same MiUI experience with the basic mono speaker setup, headphone jack, and all of the good stuff you love about Xiaomi blowers, including excellent battery life. But all things considered, I would definitely go Mi 10T Lite all the way. Another alternative from Xiaomi sub-brand Poco, at least they used to be a sub-brand, now they seem to be kind of splitting off a bit, but it's kind of complicated, is the Poco F3. And this gorgeous behemoth is fully clad in Gorilla Glass 5, unlike the many plastic blowers in this roundup, with a mighty AMOLED screen that is both bright and bold. It's a great way to take in a depraved anime or whatever other form of entertainment you happen to be into. You've got a powerful if slightly uneven stereo speaker setup with Dolby Atmos tuning, but there's no headphone jack here, which is a bit of an arse. And while the Poco F3 comes loaded with the Poco launcher rather than MiUI, it is pretty much MiUI by a different name with the exact same aesthetics. You got that same excellent control center, the same brilliant gaming mode, all that good stuff. And speaking of gaming, if you are a gamer, then you will definitely want to get this smartphone over most of the rivals in this best 5G roundup, as that Snapdragon 870 chipset means the Poco F3 can kick the arse of any game out there, even the memory scuff and Genshin Impact. And no complaints on the 48 megapixel primary camera either, which can capture good looking pics and home movies with little fuss. My only real complaint is the battery life. The Poco F3 does tend to struggle a bit to last a full day, especially if you're on it quite a bit. So if one of your priorities is battery life, definitely look elsewhere in this best budget 5G phones roundup. Alternatively though, if you've got the money for it, the Poco F3 is definitely one of the best affordable 5G phones out there. One last Xiaomi alternative that you can consider right now is the Mi 11 Lite 5G, though bear in mind this will be more expensive than the Mi 10T Lite. The biggest upgrade for your cash is the AMOLED screen, which is poppy and pleasing on the eye, while the slender design is rather fetching as well. However, as a result, this little blighter has a smaller battery, while Xiaomi has had to kill off the headphone jack too, boo hiss etc. Still, the battery life remains perfectly respectable, lasting you the day no worries, while performance is also good enough for gaming on the go. If you're not really too sold by MiUI, you'd rather have a pure stock Android experience, then definitely check out the Moto G50 5G Plus from Motorola, because you've got none of that heavy clunky launcher stuff. It's definitely got a much more stock Android vibe. Although Motorola has thrown on a couple of bonus features like motion gestures and face recognition. The Moto G 5G Plus sports Qualcomm's very capable Snapdragon 765 chipset, so you can merrily game away on whatever the hell you like, with a performance boost over that Mi 10T Lite, so the phone shouldn't show its age anytime soon. And this Motorola blower is also good for gamers because you've got dedicated gaming tools on there, just like with MiUI 12, which allow you to block notifications and the like so you're not getting distracted. And as you may have kind of guessed by the name of this smartphone and also its inclusion in this roundup, you got full 5G connectivity. And like the Mi 10T Lite, you've got another flippin' massive 6.7-inch Full HD Plus IPS screen, this time with HDR10 support. And the defining feature here is that 21:9 cinema-wide design, which means you'll get a proper widescreen view of your games or movies. And that screen features a 90Hz refresh rate as well, same as most of the smartphones in this roundup. Not quite as slick as that 120Hz Mi 10T Lite effort, but honestly, my buggered old peepers could not tell the difference. In fact, if anything, the Motorola phone feels a bit more smooth, a bit more slick when you're flicking around through all your desktops and everything, because it doesn't have that clunky launcher sat on top. Battery life is just as solid, with a 5000 mAh cell stuffed inside, while the 48 megapixel primary camera does a bang-up job with your everyday snaps. And if you want to know more, just go check out my full Motorola Moto G 5G Plus review. And no worries if your budget won't quite stretch as far as the Moto G 5G Plus, because Motorola has also launched the more affordable, more budget-friendly Motorola Moto G50, which will cost you $199 bob and still serves up those 5G smarts. This plastic slab boasts water-repellent design so it can get splashed without exploding, and you got all the usual features on board, including NFC, a headphone jack and micro SD memory card support, plus Motorola's bonus bits like that double chop torch action and that dedicated gaming mode. You've even got a bit of rear-mounted fingerprint sensor, here a bit of a blast from the past. The 6.5-inch IPS screen is nothing special, but it does support 90Hz refresh again, and the Snapdragon 480 chipset is just about good enough for all of your everyday shenanigans and some light gaming, while also offering 5G support natch. The 5000 mAh battery keeps you going all day too, no matter what you're up to, and the camera may struggle in testing conditions, but it does pack in Motorola's AI smarts to help you capture the best pics possible. Now, another great 5G ready smartphone that came out last year around the same sort of time as that Motorola Moto G 5G Plus is the Realme X50 5G, and once again, still a bit of a blinder. This Realme blower packs in Qualcomm's Snapdragon 765G platform, similar to the Moto G 5G Plus's chipset, but with boosted GPU smarts for a further improved gaming experience. Now, that's great news if you love blasting fresh new orifices in your mates online. And yep, there's yet another proper gaming mode to keep you focused and to keep things running smoothly. The Realme X50 5G sports a 4200 mAh battery, which ain't as big as some of the rivals in this best budget 5G phones roundup, but even the most arduous of days, you will get all day battery life, no worries. As for the rest of the phone, well, that's just as stunning. The 6.57-inch IPS screen is once again crisp and colourful, while the 120Hz refresh rate is a match for that Mi 10T Lite. However, the global version of the X50 5G uses Samsung's GM1 sensor for the 48 megapixel primary camera, and this does prove inferior to other phones already mentioned here, including Xiaomi's blowers. Now, just as Xiaomi smartphones use the MiUI launcher slathered there on top of Android, on Realme handsets you've got the imaginatively titled Realme UI. And this again can be a little bit clunky in places. The settings menu is an absolute mess, for instance, but it does add on a lot of extra bonus features you won't find on Android, including greater customization and, yep, a good old gaming mode. Besides that, all the usual features are packed in, including a headphone jack and NFC, but there is no way to expand the 128 gigs of storage. Now, a fresher alternative is the Realme 8 5G, which this time is powered by the MediaTek 700. That keeps everything smooth and can handle some light gaming on the go. You've got micro SD support this time around, hurrah, as well as NFC and a headphone jack. And the 6.5-inch IPS panel is near identical to the X50's, but this time with 90Hz refresh instead of 120. But again, that still seems perfectly smooth to my knackered old peepers. However, Realme's camera tech is unfortunately very basic stuff indeed. That 48 megapixel primary sensor has a simple depth sensor and macro sensor slapped alongside it, and I definitely got better results from a lot of the other phones in this best budget phone roundup. Now, moving on, and it may be getting on a little bit midway through 2021, but I'm still a fan of the Oppo Reno 4Z 5G, which you can grab for around sort of £250-ish at the time I shot this video. The Reno 4Z 5G is a Dimensity 800 series powered smartphone, and you can happily blaze through plenty of games of Call of Duty, PUBG, whatever you fancy when you just feel like murdering some strangers in a bloody and brutal fashion. Battery life is very respectable despite the 4500 mAh cell not being as big as some rivals, and yeah, shock surprise, you've got a 6.6 inch Full HD Plus IPS display with 120Hz refresh. Oppo smartphones use the Color OS launcher, which is essentially the same thing as the Realme MiUI in everything but name, and once again it is a little bit clunky here, but does add in all of those great bonus features. And just like the Realme X50 5G, you've got a headphone jack and NFC support, but no micro SD memory card support to expand the 128 gigs of internal storage. That 48 megapixel rear camera does a decent job for capturing everyday snaps, while you've also got a dual lens selfie setup for gorgeous portrait shots. At least gorgeous if you're not a stressed out baldy bugger like me. Alternatively, Oppo also just released the A54 5G and A74 5G, which serve up a very similar ColorOS experience. This time around, you've got a 6.5 inch LTPS screen with 90Hz refresh. It's not quite as good as an OLED, but it does spit out some good looking visuals for this price point. Both phones are powered by the Snapdragon 480 platform again, with 4 gigs of RAM for the A54 and 6 for the A74. But either way, you've got enough grunt here for gaming on fare like PUBG and Call of Duty. MicroSD memory card action, NFC support, headphone jack, all present and correct on both of these Oppo handsets as well. And yeah, you've once again got that slightly messy but definitely feature-stuffed ColorOS experience. Battery life is great on both, with faster charging for the A74, and the camera tech will see you through as long as lighting conditions are fine, although low light and indoor shots can look grainy or just generally a bit poo. Another manufacturer who has certainly embraced 5G is OnePlus, who have launched a couple of affordable 5G blowers right here in Blighty. First up is the OnePlus Nord, which costs just over 350 quid and boasts the same Snapdragon 765G chipset as Realme's X50 5G. No surprise therefore that online ultraviolence is a thing of glory and wonder, playing with a perfect frame rate. If your priority is battery life, then you might want to look elsewhere, because the OnePlus Nord isn't as strong as a lot of the rivals I've already mentioned in this best budget phone roundup, although at least the 30-watt fast charge support does get you powered back up in a jiffy. And I do love that refreshingly compact-ish design, especially in this lovable blue hue. That 6.44-inch OLED screen is a stunner, boasting gorgeous contrast and punchy colours, plus a smooth 90Hz finish. Definitely one of the best displays in this group. The OnePlus Nord's quad camera setup uses a 48 megapixel primary lens with Sony's IMX586 sensor, and while it's not infallible, it does a decent job with photo quality in good conditions. Plus you also have a dual selfie cam, including an ultra wide option when you want to fit in lots of heads or some serious background action. And on top of that, you've got the ever lovable Oxygen OS experience with a couple of years of guaranteed updates chucked on top. And that update guarantee is something you won't get from most other rival manufacturers, certainly at this sort of smartphone price point. I'm talking about the likes of Xiaomi, Realme and Motorola. And while smartphones from those manufacturers are generally still good a couple of years on, especially Xiaomi smartphones seem to stand the test of time remarkably well, anyone who's particularly security conscious or wants the latest, freshest software on their smartphone should definitely take a look at OnePlus. That guarantee is definitely to be commended. And if you're a bit too skint but like the sound of that OnePlus Nord, then they have just released a core edition version called the OnePlus Nord CE 5G, which is 80 quid cheaper. And this actually keeps the OLED screen and many of the best features of the original OnePlus Nord, but it does have slightly less beefy performance with a Snapdragon 750G chipset running the show instead, and it also scales back the camera tech a bit, so you've got a basic 64 megapixel primary sensor. And yes, 64 megapixels might sound impressive, but remember, it's definitely not about the megapixel count, it's about what you do with them. And unfortunately, the Nord CE 5G doesn't do very much at all. It is a basic camera, struggling when conditions are imperfect. But all the same, the performance is strong enough for gaming and multitasking, and the Nord CE 5G actually boosts the battery size while also bringing back the headphone jack. So it's certainly not all bad news at all, despite that cheaper price tag. In fact, I actually quite like the OnePlus Nord CE 5G quite a lot, helped along by that excellent battery life. Of course, got the same brilliant Oxygen OS software on there as well, and the guaranteed updates for the OS and the security side of things as well. So there's lots to like here. And if you're tempted, well, go check out my full review, which is live right now. Now, one of the most recent mid-range 5G phones released here in the UK is the Sony Xperia 10 Mark III, although it actually launched ruddy months ago. Now, the Xperia 10 Mark III boasts that same stretched 21:9 aspect ratio design as the flagship Sony smartphones, which makes for some very pleasing hand feel if you catch my drift. And it's also fully water resistant as well, IP68, which is very rare to see for a phone at this sort of price point.
That OLED screen is bright, punchy and sharp as a sushi knife with the cinematic aspect ratio well suited to movies on the move. There's no stereo speaker output, but you do at least get a headphone jack, huzzah, while the LDAC action is great for a bit of Bluetooth shenanigans. And that triple lens camera array right there on the back of the Xperia 10 Mark III serves up a 8 megapixel telephoto shooter with 2x optical zoom, which again, much like that water resistance, is very rare for a mid-range 5G smartphone. Definitely a good one for getting a bit closer to your subject, while that main 12 megapixel sensor is pretty good for everyday shooting, especially if you've got a small human or a non-human thing living with you, thanks to the swift autofocus and 10 frames per second burst mode. Battery life is also absolutely ruddy fantastic on the Xperia 10 Mark III, easily a match for that OnePlus Nord CE 5G, although the performance is very limited thanks to the very basic Snapdragon 690 chipset that's stuffed inside. Definitely see a few judders here and there. Loading the camera is just painfully slow at times. So not quite as trouser-rousing as that Xperia 1 Mark III flagship smartphone, but media fans will find a lot to love here, and the camera tech is pretty snazzy too. And last up to finish off this best budget 5G smartphones roundup of 2021, it's a bit more of an expensive option, but it has just sneaked to a gnat's pube under £400, it's $399. I'm talking about the Pixel 4a 5G. Google has upgraded the standard Pixel 4a with the more powerful Snapdragon 765G chipset, also found in a couple other phones here, so it is a proper beefcake as well as 5G-ified. The 6.24-inch OLED screen is bordered by some chunky bezels, but it's still reasonably compact for 2021, and that display is bright, colourful, and boasts sharp contrast. But of course, the definite highlight of the Pixel 4a 5G, just like all of Google's handsets, is the camera tech. If your number one priority is optics, you should definitely strive to grab yourself a Pixel 4a 5G. Indoors and out, you'll get plenty of fine detail packed into all your pics thanks to the dependable 12.2 meg shooter. It's a case of point, shoot, and bosh, great looking pics pretty much every single time, even in really low light. The Pixel 4a 5G also adds an ultra-wide-angle lens to the camera setup, something you don't have in the bog-standard Pixel 4a. It's not all good news, however, so for instance, you don't have any micro SD memory card support once again like some of the other phones in this roundup to expand the storage, and it's also a basic 60Hz OLED screen as opposed to a 90 or 120Hz, which you get in a lot of the other blowers here. But as I said, if your priority is just having one of the best cameras possible at this sort of price point, well, the Pixel 4a 5G will absolutely blow your pants off. Of course, bear in mind that now we're midway through 2021, the Pixel 5a 5G probably isn't too far off. I'm expecting it to emerge probably around sort of August time, so you might want to hang on for that. So there you have it, there's my full roundup of the best budget-friendly 5G smartphones you can bag right now as we head into the midpoint of 2021. Not sure how that happened, that's absolutely terrifying. As I say, I've only featured smartphones in this roundup that I've personally tested and reviewed right here on TechSpert, so if any of them tickled your fancy, definitely go check out my coverage. And if I didn't feature your own personal favoured 5G budget phone, it's probably because I'm actually fond of it myself, so definitely clue me into your own personal favourites down below in the comments if I did miss them out, and have yourselves a fantastic rest of the week. Oh, and subscribe and ding the notifications bell and all that other YouTube guff. Cheers everyone, love you.